Hi, I'm Guy Lawrence, and you are listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast. If you're enjoying this content and you want to find out more and join me and come further down the rabbit hole, make sure you head back to guylawrence.com.au. Awesome, guys. Enjoy the show. Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, mate. Now, I ask everyone on the show, if a complete stranger stops you on the street and asks you what you did for a living, what do you say these days?
Oh, gosh. Well, for the first part of my life, I was always saying I was a holistic dentist, and that led to a whole lot of other questions. But I think I describe myself as an advocate now, a health advocate. And, I think that's really where my direction is now. I'm looking at new careers. I'm only 63 years old, so I've got to start, looking in new directions. But this is basically how I would describe it: health advocate, holistic health advocate.
Beautiful. And I'll just mention the listeners. So I don't even know if you're aware of this, but when I first started 180 Nutrition back in 2010, because I had these big paradigm shifts around nutrition at the time and health, and started looking, and then I noticed Nora Gagaudis was coming to Australia, and then I turned up, and you were the man that brought her there.
Yeah,
and that was the first time I was exposed to any of your work.
Yeah,
and I remember thinking at the time, genuinely, wow, this guy, he's like this crusader. It's like this. It seems so radical to the general population, and when I was hungry, it came there. Like, has that always been in you, in your blood, like this quest for, I don't know, almost truth when it comes to health?
Look, it's an interesting question, and Nora's a really interesting one because I'd been working out in a gym for about 7 or 8 years with Aaron McKenzie at Origin of Energy, and Aaron had been saying to me for months, he said, "This is a book you've got to read, you've got to read." And of course, like everybody, I've got a stack of books next to me, and we've got a lot of things to read. And eventually I read it, and I could not believe it. And so I thought it was one of the best books I'd read on nutrition, so I had to get her out. But the whole thing about truth, if you like, came to me gradually, really. I mean, I started in dentistry, and a very short time after I started, I was starting to treat people with chronic headaches and neck aches, which was quite unexpected for me. And that led me to a whole model of healthcare, which I've kind of been working with for over 35 years. And that was looking at health as a combination of different stresses. And part of that model was the subject of mercury amalgam fillings, which, please don't get me started on this, Guy, because it's such a no-brainer, but yet it's still being argued about. So about 35 years ago, somebody said to me, a chiropractor said to me, "Ron, these mercury fillings, they're really not good for people." And I go, "Listen, mercury's locked into the filling. It's not a problem. I mean, if I went through uni, they told me all of these things. It's not a problem." And "No, Ron, you got to. So I read an article, and I read another article, and I couldn't believe it. So I ended up sending some samples of mercury that I'd taken out of a patient to the Australian Analytical Laboratory, and lo and behold, yes, mercury escaped. And this was a huge aha moment for me, because suddenly all of the things that I had learned that were really fundamental to me at university were thrown into question. And that began a journey 35 years ago, which got me questioning a whole lot of other things. And that's really that's been kind of empowering, exciting. I don't consider myself to be a radical. I just find the whole thing interesting.
And question everything, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's really important. Just because we are taught something, I think I heard this great quote from the Harvard Medical School, 1983. The dean got up and said to the graduating year, "Congratulations, you've passed medicine, but I've got some bad news, and that is half of what we taught you is wrong." And actually, the worst part of that is we don't know which half that is. Right. So that's kind of, I only wish I knew as much as I thought I did after I graduated. When I graduated, I'd gone to one of the best universities in Australia, been taught by the top professors. I passed, I had my degree. Really, was there anything more to learn? Well, boy, was there ever. In fact, that was the beginning of the process, not the end of it. But, you know, and that's what makes healthcare interesting. It's what makes life interesting, questioning things with an open mind.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
where do you think the health industry is going, and where do you think it's at right now? Okay, I'll add one more caveat to that then. Do you think it's improving? Because what I see, if you look at stats, not that I know much about stats, but I do wonder that we seem to be having more and more information and more ability to access knowledge to change, but I still see people struggling with it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the stats, it's a little bit depressing, you know, on some levels. You know, I mean, one in, you know, heart disease, still number one. Cancer, close second. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will contract cancer by the age of 60. There are now over 80 autoimmune conditions. That's the body attacking itself. Diabetes, obesity, blah, blah, blah. You know, we're getting older, we're told. That's why we're getting sicker. Well, actually, when you correct for age, cancer rates have gone up by about 25 to 30% in the last 30 or 40 years. And then you think, okay, we're getting older. How are our kids doing? Well, that's not a pretty picture there. You know, 1 in 3 have allergies, 1 in 4 have asthma, 1 in 10 have ADHD, 1 in 100 have autism. Now, put that into perspective, about 20 or 30 years ago, that was 1 in 5,000. And in parts of America, it's 1 in 50. So there's something going on, you know, there's something seriously going on. And yet, more people are supposedly out of poverty, less people are starving, education rates are going up. Actually, despite the fact that we're hearing about all these disasters in the world, we're actually living in a relatively peaceful time in human history. So there's a lot to be positive about, but there are some things to be concerned about. And I think health is one of them. And I think the fundamental problem there is that health and food, something as basic as the food we need, have become commodities. And those commodities are profitable. You know, so I think I've heard the expression, it's not my expression, which says good health may make sense, but it doesn't make dollars. Not for the chemical, not for the food, not for the pharmaceutical or healthcare industry. So I think there are some fundamental problems, but I'm optimistic. You know, I'm a real optimist, and I think that while kind of the world we live in has become more complicated, the solutions are actually remarkably simple. And that's why I think what you're doing, what I feel passionate about as well, about personal empowerment, is really the key. I think there was one thing that I heard along my journey from a man who I'm sure you've heard of, Alan Savory, who is into holistic management. And Alan Savory, when I interviewed him years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, he said something which has resonated with me ever since. And that is that if you are expecting the change to come from above, and I'm not talking about God here, I'm talking about, governments, regulatory bodies, health authorities, even your own doctor. If you were expecting the change to come from above, you may be waiting a long time. The change has to come literally from the ground up, from you, from me, and even from the soil in which our foods are grown in. So, you know, I think that's where we're headed, and I think that our ability to communicate now is, on the one hand, challenging, you know, when you see all the crap that goes on politically around the world, but on the other hand, it's really exciting.
It is. And the fact that we can actually have a conversation like this today and put it out into the internet and people can tune in and listen is pretty remarkable. And that's from the grassroots. I mean, that's how I've been educating myself over the years and actually trying to make tangible changes, is by able to come to conferences like yourself that you put on for Nora Gaudes and listening to podcasts and from people I respect and slowly, but having to apply it, you know.
Yeah. No, I am optimistic. I think that there is change occurring, and I think people are realising that actually it's simple. It's not complicated. It's not expensive. It's accessible. You've just got to prioritize it and take control of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, look, I'm all about change, Ron, and we've covered this many times on the podcast, and I'd love to discuss a little bit about your own personal journey with your diagnosis with cancer, because I can imagine that would have created some change in your life. But I'm also really intrigued about the mindset that you took around it, and to be able to be so positive and optimistic and everything that you ooze every time I see you. You know, you're always looking at the bright side of life. So what happened and how did that affect you at that point?
Yeah, well, you know, I was, it's funny, isn't it? Because I remember about 10 years ago saying to my wife, look, if I ever die, you know, this is what I want. My wife went, well, hang on. It's not if you ever die, you will die. And I know that was an actual aha moment for me. You know, I kind of thought, yeah, you know, I mean, that's the reality. So, you know, there was that. And then with, you know, all that I've learned, all that I was learning and writing about in my book and all that I've followed over the years, it did not come as a shock to me that I got a diagnosis of cancer. I mean, 1 in 2 men by the age of 60. Well, I knew quite a few 60-year-old men that didn't have cancer. So in a sense, I had taken one for the team, and I was that 1 in 2. So there was a strong family history. I got a newfound respect for family history. My father had it when he was 60. My brother had it when he was 60. My uncle had it also and eventually died of it. So when I got to 60, I was kind of quite determined that I would find out if I had it or not. Okay. And I had PSA levels taken, and they weren't particularly high, and I had an examination, you know, the DRE, digital rectal examination, and confronting as it is, but you know, no sign of it. And my GP said, look, if you want to have a more definitive diagnosis, go and see the urologist, and I did. So same story there. And I ended up, the guy saying, well, I don't know, not really sure. If you want to know, I can have an MRI taken. So I had an MRI taken. And if I had got back 1 or 2 little discrete spots, I wouldn't have been as concerned, but they were quite marked. And so I had a biopsy, and then the biopsy actually relates to how virulent the cancer is. They give you what's called the Gleason rating, and it's on a 6 to 10 scale, if you like. And if it's 6 and below, you could watch and wait for the rest of your life. And if it's 8, 9, or 10, that's very virulent. And mine was just under 8. So I then had an operation, and the operation is a prostatectomy. And fortunately, I didn't have any spreading to bone or lymph glands, and I didn't need any chemo or radio. But it's taken a good year or 2 or 2 years to recover from that. And, you know, it raises all sorts of challenges physically and emotionally, which, you know, I think is really an important thing for men to talk about. And it's been interesting in my practice that since that's happened, I've actually had some really interesting discussions with some of my patients on a far more intimate level, where I've had to actually ask my nurse if she wouldn't mind leaving the room, because us guys have got to have a chat, you know. But it actually has been very interesting to be a patient in the process, you know, as a practitioner for many years. You know, as a dentist, you're always a patient at some point, as a dental patient. So that's quite always confronting and good to remind somebody who's a practitioner of what a patient goes through. But on this level, it took it to a whole other level. And, you know, it's so interesting to see. I mean, I'm very grateful for the skill of my surgeon, and I think I've got off well. You know, I've made a reasonable, good recovery. I'd say I've kind of recovered 90% of where I was, but nothing about anything else was mentioned. You know, this was the surgery, this is what needed to be done, this is what you do. You know, the rest is all very airy-fairy in the real world of crisis medicine. And that's the thing. You know, like when it comes to a crisis, our Western medical model is a great place to be. But the problem is that our healthcare system has become a chronic disease management system. And so there's this kind of, if you want to get the best of both worlds, you've got to be open to things. And so, you know, my own journey there has been an interesting one. as a patient. It's been an interesting one on a recovery road. It's been a testing one, and I've been very grateful to my family and my wife in particular for, you know, being incredibly supportive of me during this journey, because it does raise all sorts of challenges. And I think I've been very grateful for being as well as I can in preparation for the operation and afterwards as well, reassessing, you know, how to maximise what I can do to minimise my chances of recurrence. And that's been interesting, you know. I mean, a whole lot of different areas there which we could talk about.
Yeah, I can only imagine, like, something like that, you know. I just think that, you know, if that was me, it would shake me to my core, but it also make me realize how precious life is.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing, Guy, you know, like, if everything that I've been through, and people do ask me about my book, you know, which I have to tell them is not autobiographical, you know, the book, A Life Less Stressed, not autobiographical, aspirational, really, aspirational to me now more than ever. What have I learnt from all of my explorations is that I have so much to be grateful for. You know, expressing gratitude is profound, and I am extremely grateful for my life and everything that surrounds me. You know, I've been very lucky in my life. And so even with this diagnosis, and I know, you know, some of your listeners, you will have met people along the way that will have said the cancer diagnosis was a really positive thing in their life. And you know, obviously we would all prefer not to have, you know, there are other positive things I could have thought of in preference, but having experienced it, yes, there are positives that come from it. You know, our mortality, recognising our mortality is a big thing. Recognising all the things we have to be grateful for, a big thing. Taking stock of what is good for your health and what is not good for your health is another huge thing that can make you feel actually really good. I mean, I am now... I mean, I was feeling pretty good before, to be honest. I've always been into my health, but I feel really well now. You know, I've realised, for example, alcohol. You know, I mean, I never was a big drinker, but I would describe myself as a social drinker.
Yeah.
And I think some of my friends would tell you that there have been times when I've been more social than others. And maybe overdone it a little bit. And now I realise that that's just, my tolerance level for that is just minuscule. And that's been a very positive thing for my general health. You know, so that is one thing. I think as I've explored this more over particularly the last 3 or 4 years, cancer as a metabolic disease is a huge topic. And this whole fasting, ketogenic experience is, you know, gee, that's something that's just going to be enormous and empowering, because, you know, you can either view your health with, I know we talked about this before we came on about Bruce Lipton, who's a personal hero of mine, but, you know, you can either have this idea that family history is everything. You know, like I said to you, I had a family history of cancer, genetic determinism, blah, blah, blah. Well, that is one way of viewing it, but another way of viewing it is that certain things occurred emotionally, environmentally, nutritionally, posturally, dentally even, that triggered my genes to express themselves in a way they did. And that's a totally different way of looking at your health. And it's a very empowering way of looking at your health. So, you know, there's been a lot of positives that have come out of it. And I actually, at this point in my life, am feeling really well for it.
Yeah, amazing. I know, because I'm a big fan of Bruce as well. I just think he's a rock star, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And because he, correct me if you're wrong, but he talks about epigenetics being above the genes. So it's the environment from everything that's coming in, making the gene express itself.
Yeah. Well, he talks about thoughts are things, and those thoughts are neurotransmitters, proteins that get produced, and they circulate through the body, and they attach to a cell membrane, and they cause a cell to express itself. And that expression can then be passed on to your next generation, which, you know, if you're going to blame your parents, you can really blame them now. You know, you can even blame your grandparents, you know. So, you know, that gets passed on. And so that's epigenetics as I understand it. And like you, I think Bruce is an amazing, he's a rock star.
Has that kind of the knowledge that you've learned, has that changed anything, the way you kind of, maybe your entire thinking process on a daily basis? Are you more observant of, I guess, your actions, your thoughts, your emotions during the day?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, this is the whole thing about positive psychology too. You know, like there's a lot of work being done by a guy called Martin Seligman, who is a professor of psychology in the East Coast of America, and he was very big on positive psychology, and he was very big on happiness. And what he was the father, if you like, of positive psychology, because what he said was psychologists always sit there and listen to people's problems, and it can be a very negative experience, but let's explore positive psychology. Let's explore the positive side of it. And what he then came up with was this PERMA model, P-E-R-M-A, P-E-R-M-A, as a framework for thinking about health and wellness. Now, what do those things stand for? P stands for positive emotions, being positive about life, getting those neurotransmitters to be released that are positive for your cell membranes to express themselves. Great. That's the P. The E is engagement, being engaged in what you do, you know, being really present in the moment. P-E-R, R is relationships. And that is all, you know, like Harvard Medical School have done the longest study ever on longevity, health and wellness, 75-year study, where they followed a lot of individuals and they looked at all their risk factors, all of their different markers of blood pressure, cholesterol, you name it. And what did they find was the greatest predictor of longevity, health and wellness? Relationships. Relationships were the key. And you know, that's not just a significant partner, but it could be part of a community. It could be your friends, your family, relationships, real relationships, not the relationships that necessarily appear on our phones or no. So that's the R. M, so we've got P-E-R-M, that is meaning. Is there meaning in your life? Is there meaning in what you do? And then the A was all about accomplishment or acknowledgement. Have you accomplished something? Is there acknowledgement for what you do? And more recently, and interestingly, he added another letter to that model, and that letter was H, because what he recognized was that if you weren't healthy, it was very difficult to P-E-R-M-A your life. So focusing on health. So it's a beautiful model. You know, I mean, Bruce Lipton is a rock star, there's no doubt, but Martin Seligman certainly is up there with them. And his PERMA model is something that I think is a really good framework for thinking of life.
Yeah, that's spot on. But the question I always ask myself as well, because that's almost with the health on the end, like a chicken and egg thing, because I wonder if you don't have any of the PERMA in your life lined up, and you could be doing all the right things with your nutrition and your exercise and your sleep patterns, but then if you have those social disconnections removed from you, I wonder how much that overrides the underlying work from the other side of things.
Yeah. Well, look, we tend to think of all of these things, whether they're stressors or health, we kind of think of them in a very linear way, but they're just so interconnected. You know, I mean, that's what holistic is. It's, you know, thinking holistically understands that life is, it's not a linear. What is more important? Is nutrition more important than exercise? Is this more important? One affects the other, and it's, you know, they're inextricably linked. So, you know, I mean, I have a personal view about how one should prioritize it, but doing an audit of your life is a pretty good place to start.
Totally.
And you know, as far as I know, we only get one shot at life. I mean, I could be wrong, but as far as I know, we only get one shot at life. And I think if you had to give yourself one commandment in life, it would be to fulfill your potential, you know, whatever it is you decide to do. And in order to do that, you know, I think being healthy is a pretty good, you know, thing to strive for. So, you know, I think it's about prioritizing. It's a think about doing an audit of your life, and you may as well make the most of it, because it's the only shot we've got at it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's the other thing it triggered, because I'm off to Sardinia next week to the Blue Zones for a week.
Fantastic.
So yeah, and that's the cultural thing, the community, the purpose. They all have a role in their life. They celebrate the elderly.
Yep.
You know, it's quite huge, the interconnection there that goes on.
Yeah, well, we've come into a really interesting, challenging period where, you know, for literally millions of years, certainly last few 100,000 years, and certainly up to about 50 years ago, our community was a really important part of every aspect of our lives. It nurtured us from birth. It taught us all about cultural and health norms. It supported us through education. It was our aged care. It was our health care. It was our emotional support. And now we're all over the place. You know, I mean, gee, you know, we are. We're all over the place. Our families are fragmented, and it's been the last 30 or 40 years has been the rise of the individual. You know, and that's been a great thing for rights of personal rights, women's rights, children's rights, sexual, freedom, sexual rights. All these individual rights have been really important, but they've kind of removed a lot of support that we have traditionally had, and that is a real challenge. You know, building our new communities, and I think we're kind of learning how to do that.
Totally. The one thing I've done since I've moved on from 180 is focus on building a community, which I've been doing, and there's over 70 of us in there now, and it's been wonderful to see that, and it's had an even bigger impression on me than I could ever have imagined. You know, where you're around people that support you and prop you up and not pull you down and hold you back and just want to see the best for you.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, a lot of people like you've come from another part of the world, and you know, I know my wife has as well, and you know, our backgrounds we're from all over the place. So it's taken us a little while to get our heads around what the challenges are, and that's why I think I'm quite optimistic. I mean, in order to solve a problem, it always helps to know what that problem is, and you know, so this is part of what I think the movement and the use of technology is potentially very positive.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, what you mentioned your book earlier as well. So before I move on, I want to bring it up because a life less stressed is something we all want, Ron, right?
Yes, we do, including me.
So if you could distill it into footnotes of the book, and what have been the trigger points for people listening to this? What were your conclusions?
Yeah, well, I think I've taken, I say the book's not autobiographical. It's not. In fact, I'm now using a life less stressed as my mantra when I meditate. You know, I thought you could have an Ayurvedic sort of a resonating mantra. You know, I'm going to use this as my mantra. But anyway, it is autobiographical in a sense that it's a journey that I've been on. And I think it's a journey that makes sense. And it's in 3 parts of the book. Part 1 of the book is really about laying the foundation for what our healthcare is like today. And I've kind of shared some of those statistics with you. It also addresses this issue of why public health messages are so confusing and often contradictory. And I think that's a really important thing to know, because it's a story that's really easy to miss. But once you've heard it, it's very difficult to ignore. And what it is a story of is the role of the food, chemical, and pharmaceutical industry in all levels of healthcare. You know, we hold evidence-based medicine up now as a gold standard, but when you look into it a little bit further, you realise that it's very difficult to distinguish between evidence-based marketing and evidence-based medicine. And so that is confronting, to know that perhaps a lot of the public health messages that we've built our foundation on, low fat, you know, animal fat is bad, You know, seed oils are good, low salt, cholesterol's a demon, you know, blah, blah, blah. I could list them off. It's confronting to learn that these are actually more about evidence-based marketing than evidence-based medicine. But what it is what the conclusion I want people to reach at the end of the first part of the book is personal empowerment. The only solution is to take control yourself. Okay, so that's the springboard of part one. Part two is that we're all affected by stress. Yes, I don't think that's particularly groundbreaking. But as I said, in order to deal with the problem, you've got to know what that problem is. So what I've done is I've defined stress as anything that compromises our health, that challenges and potentially compromises our health. And to that effect, I've identified five stresses which do that. And they are emotional, environmental, nutritional, postural, and dental stress. And those five stresses impact on each other. Now, you know, people are obviously familiar perhaps with the first four, and they may not be familiar with the dental stress, and they may think, Ron, you're doing that because you're a dentist, and that may be true, but why I've included it is I've included it actually for anybody with a mouth who is interested in their health and hasn't fully connected the two. And it often surprises people to learn that the dental stress actually involves digestion, it involves sleeping and breathing, it involves posture, it involves toxicity, chronic inflammation, systemic diseases, chronic headaches, neck aches, and jaw pain. I could go on, and I do go on in chapter whatever it is in my book. So that's why I've included dental stress. Now then, after you've identified, part two is you've identified all the stresses and you're trying to minimize them, then what are the solutions to these problems? And as I said to you, as the world becomes more complicated, the solutions are remarkably simple. And I actually, at one stage, called the book Simply Be Well, because, you know, they are based on the five pillars of health and wellness, and they are sleep, breathe, nutrition, movement, and thought. And so that's the kind of journey that the book takes a reader on, and it's the kind of journey that I think is a good way for people to go.
Wonderful. We do have a habit of complicating things, don't we, to then get, like you say, a simple solution.
Yeah. It's actually, as I say, it's really actually quite simple. You've just got to commit to it, of course, and but understand it as well.
Yeah. Before we move on, another thought occurred to me, and it's got nothing to do with what we've covered, but you mentioned one word there. I heard you say once, eat with your mouth, breathe through your nose.
Yeah, think with your mouth. Yeah, okay.
Oh, eat with your mouth,
yep.
through your nose.
Yeah.
Something like that anyway. Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of people don't give much thought to breathing. You know, it's why I've actually made it a separate pillar on its own, because, well, sleep is a function of quantity, getting enough sleep. That is about 8 hours for 90% of us, and quality, that means breathing well while we're asleep. So for those 8 hours, breathing well while you're asleep is really important. And so what does breathing well mean? Because we've got another 16 hours of the day to deal with. So what does that mean? And that means breathing through your nose. Noses are for breathing, mouths are for feeding. And the reason breathing through your nose is so important is because noses are designed, or have evolved, let's not say designed, noses have evolved to warm, humidify, and filter the air before you take it into your lungs. So when you breathe through your nose, there are 5 levels of filtration. There are the fine hairs that filter out the particles. There's the mucus lining the cavities, which kill the bacteria. There are the sinuses and the turbinates, which warm and humidify the air. Then you've got your adenoids. Then you've got your tonsils. And then you breathe it in. But if you breathe through your mouth, you bypass the first 4 and you rely on your tonsils. And that's why if you're a mouth breather, you will be more predisposed to respiratory problems like asthma, infections, enlarged tonsils, sore throat. The other thing that breathing through your nose does is that there's this wonderful thing called nitric oxide, which is one of the body's most important regulators. 60% of the body's nitric oxide is produced only when you breathe through your nose. So there's another important reason. And the third, or another really, there's so many reasons, but here's another one. A lot of people are really focused on acid and alkali. You know, they don't want to be too acidic. They want to keep alkali. They'll drink alkali water. Don't get me started on that. You know, so the balancing out of body chemistry is really important. It turns out that breathing is one of the most, if not the most important regulator. And so by breathing through your nose, breathing slowly and gently from your diaphragm is a great way to balance out body chemistry. So nasal breathing and breathing in general is really important. In fact, I often say the secret to a long life is to keep breathing for as long as you can. Okay, not radical, I know. But the secret to a healthy long life is to breathe well for as long as you can, and there's a difference.
Yeah, love it. I'm very conscious of these things these days as well myself. But do you still use tape when you go to sleep?
I do. I know that's a bizarre thing, but you know, it's I learned this from a Russian breathing technique called Buteyko, and it's all about breathing retraining. And yes, there's a lot of really great exercises that you can do to improve your ability to breathe through your nose. But one of them that captured my imagination was the use of Micropore Tape, which is a thin paper tape that just goes over the mouth at night. And honestly, I mean, I do it still. It took my wife a while to get her head around doing it. She does it as well. But the number of patients that I have recommended this to is quite remarkable. And they fall into two categories, or three really. One category is they look at me and they think, is this guy crazy? I mean, he's actually telling me to put tape on my mouth at night. Okay, let's park that group aside for the moment. Another group which tries it and just simply cannot believe that something as simple as this can make as big a difference to their health as it does.
Yeah.
And that's the second group. And the third group is the group that tries it and their nose is so blocked that they actually can't do it. And so that leads us down another path of working with ENT specialists or working with nutritionists and naturopaths to reduce the inflammatory foods, to you know, improve the sinuses, or to actually have something corrected. But they're the three groups. And yeah, look, and there's some good science to support it.
Yeah, totally. There's a great book called The Oxygen Advantage, actually.
Yes.
That goes into
Patrick McEwen.
That's it. Yes, that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've spoken with Patrick, and he's a world authority on the Buteyko technique. So Patrick is awesome.
There you go. What was the name of the tape again?
Micropore Tape.
Micropore Tape.
Yeah,
right.
it's a very thin paper tape, and you fold over a little edge. I mean, you've got a little bit of facial hair there, guys, so it wouldn't be hard to find. But for me, you know, if you put the thin tape on, it's sometimes hard to find at night. So you need a little tag to find it if you want to. And the other hint is to not pull it off in the morning, because after 3 or 4 days of doing that, your lips will be sore. You just poke your tongue out. And the other hint that I would give people is to just do it while you're watching TV or reading, to give yourself confidence that your nose will unblock. In fact, as the nitric oxide kicks in, that's nature's natural bronchodilator. So a blocked nose will unblock when you breathe through your nose.
Yeah.
How's that for a bit of paradox?
No, I love it. I love it. Ron, I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to change some gears.
Mm-hmm.
I ask everyone on the show these questions, and we might have touched on this, I'm not sure, but I'll ask it anyway. What's one of your low points in your life you've had, but later in life turned out to be a blessing?
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, but yeah, all right. The thing that comes to mind is I've been blessed, and I have two daughters. One's 32 and the other's 29 years or 28 years old. And you know, when people are pregnant, you just assume that's, you know, it happens. And here we are, we have children. But in between our two, we had a stillborn, and that taught me at a very it taught me really profoundly how precious life was. And it also taught me the importance of dealing with grief, because like a lot of men, I just wanted to move on. You know, let's look, we've done it. It's happened. Let's just move on. Let's just not talk about it. You know, let's just get on with life. And my wife dragged me to confront grief, and that was a very positive thing. So from this very low point in my life, unexpected point in my life, I realized how precious life was, and I also learned to deal with grief, and I thought that was a really profound moment in my life.
Yeah, wow, thanks for sharing that, Ron. What does your morning routine look like?
My morning routine. Look, my morning routine starts the night before by committing to going to bed really early. And I used to be a sort of 12 o'clock. I do all my best work when the kids are asleep. I really work well late at night. Then I started to learn about sleep. And so I go to bed at 9:30. I wake up at 5:30. And at 5:30, I do a workout. I mean, I used to love going to Origin of Energy gym, where I do a lot of functional movements, and you know, it was just so, I learned so much there. I went there for about 8 years. But now what I do is I get up in the morning and I always do the resting squat, you know, the sort of ancestral squat position, just for 2 minutes. And then I do 10 rounds of salute to the sun salutations, yoga. When I went to uni, I used to do yoga. This is a while ago now, 40 years ago. And the guy said, if you're going to stick with one exercise, stick with this one. And I did. And so I've done that for a long time. Sun salutations, 10 rounds. And then I do a 15 to 30 minute workout, probably 4 times a week. And that includes some, flexibility, some strength, some core. And then I'll meditate for about 10 to 15 minutes. That's a work in progress. And then I skip breakfast. I've actually got into, more recently in the last year or so, intermittent or calorie restriction. I think that's a huge area. So I don't eat until usually around 1 o'clock. And that's my morning routine.
Beautiful. Love it. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks for asking. I don't share that often enough.
If you could have dinner with anyone tonight, from any time frame, anywhere in the world, who would it be and why?
Golly, you should have really given me this a lot longer to think about that one. Dearie me, what's going to come? Look, you know, I kind of always, I've met so many great people on my podcast, as I'm sure you have too. And, you know, I think, look, we talked about Bruce Lipton. I think he's a really cool character, and I'd sort of really enjoy having a chat with him, I guess. I should have. You could have given me. I know there's going to be. I'm going to wake up at about 5 o'clock tomorrow morning and go, I should have said.
Blah, blah, blah.
So I'll email you the response. But off the top of my head, because we've been talking about him, Bruce. You know, Bruce is really, for so many good reasons.
Yeah, totally love it. I'd be coming if you did hook that one up, I think, Ron. Last question. What's one thing about yourself most people wouldn't know?
Most people would know that I'm a little bit obsessive at times. In fact, my daughter, who I work here in my home office with, who's 32, said to me, Ron, if you, Dad, she calls me Dad. She said, Dad, if I was you or my child, I'd have you diagnosed as ADHD. Not the A, because I have a good attention span, but it's the H, the hyperactive. She's always telling me to calm down. So maybe that. Yeah, or maybe a lot more people would have thought. They just say, Ron, just calm down. I'm excitable.
And last thing, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners to ponder on with everything we've covered today?
Well, you know, I think we touched on it, and that is that if you've got one shot at life, and I believe we only do have one shot at life, fulfilling your potential would have to be a major goal. And in order to do that, you know, taking control of your own health, building resilience, and just to be the best you can be. That's what I'd leave you with.
Yeah, beautiful, Ron. And for anyone who wants to check out more of your work, and where can they get a copy of your book as well? Like, where can we send them?
Yeah, well, the website, you know, drronehrlich.com, that's EHRLICH. drronehrlich.com is a good place. It's where you can access a whole lot of stuff that's going on, and we've got some pretty exciting stuff coming up.
Beautiful. Ron, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed that conversation, and it was wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy.
Thank you.